So, Alex, you and I met. It's possible we've met prior to this, but my recollection or sense is that we met at I.O. Through music improv. Is that your recollection as well?
Yeah, in a sense, because I remember you subbed in for my improv to sketch class for one evening, and that was it's kind of one of those things where I felt like, ooh, this is something I felt good at least for that moment. And that, I think, was kind of where when you mentioned, hey, I have my own classes here, I went, oh, well, hot diggity, I got to jump on that.
You mentioned there that you said you felt like you were good at that at the time. Did your sense, and I remember that as well, does your sense of what it means to be good at musical improv, did that change in your sense of what it's like to be good at that, or to qualify yourself as good at that? Did that change over time?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where I always think I like to say I used to be so smart. I used to be so smart. I used to be so sure of myself. And I think the best thing that a good class will do is show you how uninformed you really are. And kind of going through your classes, there were times where I had those struggles where I felt like, oh man, I kind of missed the mark on some of these sets. But those were moments of growth. Growth is not comfortable. And going through that, I think looking back on it, I was very into trying to find the jokes and jump on the jokes. But you had a very Zen Buddhist way of teaching, and I really was drawn to that. So being able to kind of have that very ethereal Zen sense of music improv, seeing it as a flow was a huge part of it.
You mentioned that personal growth is something that's important to you. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
And would you say that your understanding of your own mental health situation, would you say that there has been personal growth that has gone into managing or understanding your bipolar 1?
Yeah. It's been quite a process, and a lot of acceptance and denial going back and forth.
Would you take me back to, Alex, would you take me back to the first time you experienced either a manic episode or a depressive episode? And this might be prior to receiving a diagnosis, maybe not even knowing what it is.
Yeah, so I think, things were starting off in high school. I think my sister was one of those people that had was always getting A's. She was very studious, but she didn't have much of a social life. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I don't want that. I want to have I want fun. Who cares about grades? And so I focused a lot on extracurriculars. And as I focused on extracurriculars, I found myself, having a lot of plates to fill. They say that your energy is a pie. You need to slice it up and divide it. Well, I found out that I somehow had this source of energy that could just keep going. I didn't have to divide my pie. I could just keep giving energy to things. And one of those things was I was a band kid. I played trumpet, then euphonium, then trombone, then saxophone, then sousaphone. And then eventually I was the drum major of the band, so the guy that conducts at the very front. And I had a fancy baton. I did some twirling. but I would conduct the band at the football games, and the energy that was there. This is kind of feeding into my performance. I was known as the dancing drum major. I'd always make sure there's a dance in there. And I would be getting so much energy from the audience and from my band, and I was able to ride that energy, build more energy from it, and it was this perpetual motion machine that would kick. And my heart would race. It felt like someone else was pushing on the gas pedal. I didn't need to put any effort into it. And I would just keep going and going and going. And I would stay up way late into the night, get up way early in the morning. Everything was great. I would show up to school and, people were happy to see me. My assignments would just happen to be done just perfectly. Everything was just perfect. Parking spaces would be available for me right then and there. And I realized I was just the happiest person that could ever be. In fact, I was the happiest person there ever was. I was the source of happiness for the world. With my happiness, there could come a font of knowledge. In fact, people were happy just being around me, and that happiness was contagious. And through my happiness, I could solve world hunger, war, famine, disease. All of it could just be cured by my source of happiness. I was the Messiah of happiness. I was God incarnate, and I lived that way for an entire summer, just walking around as a Messiah. Of course, you don't tell people you're a Messiah, because otherwise they'll think you're God. Of course, that would mean that you're not. So it was this awesome secret that I kept to myself, that I knew that I was the savior of mankind. And you can see how it's just bit by bit, it builds up. And I was able to, it was probably it was a magical time. But it was, I think looking back on it, you realize that's not sustainable. And it certainly wasn't. Immediately after, eventually I realized, well, hey, you're not God. And the come down was hard. It was realizing that, I'm not the ceiling. I'm just like anyone else. I'm average. I'm normal. I'm forgettable. I'm replaceable. My friends, they're not really my friends. My family, well, they don't really care. This is nothing that I'm nothing special. In fact, I'm a burden to my family and to my friends. And then I went through. Then I got into college, and I remember I thought, I am what's keeping humanity from reaching its potential. There are so many good, awesome people out there. And war, famine, disease could all be cured, but the only problem is that I'm here. And so I need to do the sacrificial lamb. And so I remember I drank a bottle of port, got into my nicest suit and tie, went up to the 6th floor of my apartment building that I was living in, and there's a balcony, and I was looking down. I'm like, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna jump. And then just before I was ready to, I got up there, and I think what happened is when you stand up there and you go down, well, that supers you up. You realize, it's you to the ground, and the endorphins hit. I had this moment of thinking, have I done everything? Have I thought of everything? and I called the suicide hotline. And I remember chatting with them, and they started talking about literally anything other than what was going on. I'm going, what's going on? I'm on the edge here, and you're asking me about what's my favorite kind of cookie. Like, what type of suicide prevention is this? Little I know, they were buying time for the police to arrive, and I heard a click, and right behind 8 police officers, 2 guns on, and one of them just came right up to me. I barely had time to say anything in the phone. They took my phone, they handcuffed me, threw me into the back of the car, and sent me to the psych ward where I was for a week. And I'll have to say, quarantine, however, in 2020, quarantine reminds me very much of that psych ward, because trapped inside something against your will, and you don't really know what's going on. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday melt away. They no longer exist. It's now just today, yesterday, and tomorrow. And it was the longest week I've ever spent. Well, I guess until now. But it's one of those things where I look back at that and I see that it was a necessary thing for me to confront, because that's where I got my diagnosis. That's where I got the medication the first medication that started down the road to being able to have a somewhat productive life. I eventually was able to finish my degree, move out. I've gone through probably half a dozen, medications, trying different kinds. For instance, Depakote is a fantastic medication for depression because it's hard to kill yourself when you're throwing up all the time. But I look at the different medications I took. Eventually I found some that actually stuck, and the ones I'm on now, I've been on for a couple months because the last ones just became too expensive, but the ones now are working great, and for that I'm very thankful.
Alex, can I ask you, you mentioned that week on the inside of that hospital was a long week, and time seems like it was passing slowly. And then you added in that it was the longest week until now. What are you referring to when you mention that? Are you implying that the current week of here in the middle of June, that this is a longer week than that in some way? What are you referring to?
I guess I mean probably more so in March and April, just with quarantine. Things have lightened up now, so things are moving at a faster pace. But I think people, that's listeners to this may now be able to understand what it's like to be involuntarily taken in. Because when you're forced inside a place, you find yourself just having trouble figuring out time. And I think a lot of my friends, when COVID started off, were saying, wow, time is weird. And I totally agree with that. Time became weird. And I think that's something that now that people understand, maybe people will, when we talk about someone who's involuntarily detained into a psych ward, that's very much the experience.
And so going back to that being involuntarily detained, looking back at that experience, now maybe putting words into your mouth a little bit here, is there do you feel like they saved your life?
Oh, absolutely. It was, yeah, absolutely.
And this is not to take away from. I've been had that feeling too of being involuntarily detained, and recognizing that it was for my own good, but at the same time, still acknowledging at times that there are ways in which this system could be improved. Do you feel like there's anything that you would champion about your experience, either on the plus or the minus side, in terms of being on the inside of things? Is there anything about your experience that you would like to highlight as something that was a good thing that they did, or anything that in retrospect you feel like they could have done a better job of?
I will be honest, the first thing I think of with that question is the fact that when I was on that balcony and I turned around and there were the 8 police, there were 2 guns drawn. Like, I think to myself, what? Don't jump or we'll shoot? Like, that was the way that we see policing now is very much this heavy-handed, or ham-fisted. My dad has a saying that when the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And looking at policing, these were police officers. I don't know exactly how trained they were in mental illness, but recognizing that I could have been a target right there for a gunshot. And there have been in the news people who are suicidal that have been shot and killed. Those things happen. And so this was a time where calling the police was probably the right thing to do for the phone hotline operator. But there was that element of risk that I don't know if is necessary.
That's very interesting, and I could certainly imagine that there are groups of folks, depending on a variety of factors, that might seem to pose more or less of a threat when they're at that point of extreme emotional distress, that a situation like that could easily turn confrontational depending on expectations of the individual who is in distress and how people react to that individual based on a variety of factors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't have much to add to that.
Yeah, I hear that. So at that point, that suicidal ideative episode, when you were talked down and then eventually brought into the hospital, how long ago was that, and how old were you?
Yeah, that was 2014, so I was 20 years old, so that gives you an idea of my age. I think that's one thing that's very characteristic apparently of bipolar disorder is it oftentimes really pops up in your 19, 20, 21. That's when things start to happen. And my great-grandmother was bipolar as well. They didn't quite have the diagnosis till she was much older. Back then she was just crazy Grandma Kirk. But with the diagnosis that she got, eventually they put her on lithium. I'm not entirely sure of how that helped her out later in life, but I like to think that having that diagnosis would have improved her life to some degree. And
so it was in 2014 that you were diagnosed. Was it on that trip in? So they heard your story about the extreme highs that you were at, and then the subsequent lows, and then from inpatient you were diagnosed as bipolar.
Yep. Yeah.
And then you were put on medication, and then at what point? What's the rest of your college story like at that point?
Yeah. So one thing I want to say about medication, that was a scary part because one of the questions I had when they were putting me on medication is, am I going to lose who I am?
Right.
Who am I after this? What happens when the saving is done? And they first put me on lithium. So one thing that I taught, when I tell people about bipolar disorder, and they have no idea about it, it's a mood disorder. So I talk about things from a 0 to 10 scale. 5 is absolutely neutral. 6 is a good day. People have 6s. Hey, I like Doctor Who. I watched an episode of Doctor Who. 7 is a great day. My friends came over. We all watched Doctor Who, and we had a great party and went to the night, and everyone went home. Most people, their highs end at 7. 8 is, I have met David Tennant. He is right there. We went to Comic-Con. I got to chat with him. Oh my God, I feel we are a kinship. 9 is, I know the Doctor. I know who the Doctor is, like the character. I see it's not David Tennant, it is the Doctor. And 10 is, I am the Doctor. I can save time and space. So you can see a 9 and a 10 is the danger zone. An 8 is kind of still that superhuman, but it's still grounded in some reality. And the same thing goes down below. A 4 is a bad day. 3, even worse. 2, you can't get out of bed. 1 is suicidal. 0, I'm on the roof and I'm gonna jump because God wants me to. And the meds that I took when I first started off, the lithium, meant that I could go 5 to 6 to like 6.5, and then bam, put me back down to 5. And 5 to 6, maybe 6.5, bam, down again. And I couldn't break through to feel that gold, that lovely rush, the feeling of being in love with the world that I was so enthralled with. And I was so fortunate to have a doctor that listened to that. Many of my friends and family, when I told them about this problem, they went, oh, well, you're normal now, so that's what it's like being normal. And my doctor said, well, if you don't like these drugs, you're not going to take them. So let's find something that works. And so for me, the journey is, I want to get to an 8. I do not want to get to a 9 or a 10, but I want to get to an 8. Because at an 8, sometimes I cry tears of joy for no reason. And I just think about how happy everyone will be, but I'm still able to function. And that is a beautiful place to be. And that may mean that on the other side, I experience 2s. I don't experience 3s, I experience 2s, because it's very much a balance. But when you've experienced those 8s, when you've flown with the angels, the demons are easier to tolerate. It's okay to have that trade-off.
And that's I really appreciate that arc of the rating system, and I can definitely relate to all of those layers. With me, it's not a Doctor Who model, but it's I take it David Tennant is an actor who portrays Doctor Who. Is that correct?
He's fantastic.
Yeah. So I want to touch a little bit on, you've brought in a couple times the aspect of the psychosis that is this extreme pressure / gift to be sort of the captain of fun, all the way to a messiah figure. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you want to get to a 7 or an 8 where you are feeling alive, and you still feel a highness to life, a joy in life, but that it doesn't get out of control to the point where you believe you're God. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
And have you May I ask you this? When was the last time? So 2014, you had that psychotic episode leading into, or the manic episode leading into a depressive episode. Since then, have you been hospitalized or had thoughts that you were a messianic character?
So I've had a couple times where, sometimes there were times I stopped taking my drugs because I felt I didn't need them. I would be living in that 4 to 6 realm for so long. I think, oh well, I'm cured. I don't need these drugs. I'm feeling normal. And I forget that it's the drug. If the drugs are working right, you don't notice them. But because I didn't notice them, I made the mistake of thinking, oh, they're not working. Nothing's happening. And so, I've stopped, and I've had times, even here in Chicago, I got probably to a 2 or a 1 where I would occasionally just jump onto, or take my venture card, scan onto the CTA. I wouldn't get onto a train because I was contemplating, should I jump in front of one? But there was something that would always keep me there. But, I would just stand there for an hour. And eventually I would come to my senses. The adrenaline would kick in, and I'd come home, and I'd usually call someone to help me out. My uncle was one person who I could always talk to, I remember,
So you feel the normalization. You tend to trust that you're going on, and you forget momentarily, potentially, that you're getting support from the medication, and you have a desire to feel that to push the number higher again, correct?
Yeah.
And so then it sounds like there's a period in between 2014 and now when you went off your medication. And I'm wondering if you would take me back to that time or times, and what happened when you went off your medication that time.
Well, I remember my family has a lovely little cottage vacation house. It's like a tiny cabin on this island in the Puget Sound called Whidbey Island. And on this island there's the city of Langley. And every year at the city of Langley, they have a festival called Django Fest. It's the nation's largest gypsy jazz festival, and as a musician, I love to go there. Gypsy jazz is my favorite genre of music. I'm a guitarist and a trombonist, so I always bring both because the trombone is fancy to have when you're in a group, but the guitar is a nice thing to have when you're on your own. And I remember just when that festival came up, I could just ride that high of performance, but it would be even higher. Where I would play music and the music sounded gorgeous, no matter what I said. It was the most genius notes to play when I was improvising. Everything was just perfect. And my friends were there. Everyone loved me. I could go on to any venue. You would play till 4 or 5 in the morning, and sometimes people would be gone and I'd still be playing.
And so at that time, was that feeling good doing that? What was the path of that and the location within the time frame, if you can recall, of when you might have decided or organically just stopped taking your regular dose of medication?
Yeah, I think it was kind of in that zone that I stopped taking my medication because I knew I was going to get a high and I wanted to feel higher. You know, I didn't want something to stop me.
So, Alex, I'm interested now. I can relate to this for sure. For me, it almost feels like when that manic experience starts to take over and something in life is almost feeling like it's, and I'm not attempting to put words into your mouth, sort of express my experience with it, that it's almost like it's destined that you're gonna take this journey.
Yeah.
And is that fair to say for you at all?
Yeah, this idea of destiny suddenly becomes very physical.
I'm wondering if you would share with me an improvised song along the lines of when you get that taste of destiny and you want to start feeling it for real, if that makes sense. Are you open to exploring singing a musical improvised song? It doesn't have to be obviously funny.
Absolutely.
So I'll stick with this music, or I'll change something up. Maybe I'll start with something fresh. But again, that sense of fulfilling a destiny by getting higher.
Yeah. Everything happens for a reason. Everything in the future is foretold. Everything happens for a reason. There's no reason to be left out in the cold. The gauntlet is dropped, the cast is dyed. You know you don't even have to try. In these times you are known that greatness is often rarely shown. Everything happens for a reason, and that reason is you. Leaves change every season, and the flowers get covered in dew. Everything happens for a reason, and that reason is you.
Great, thank you so much, Alex. Now, as a performer of musical improv, and also in ways as we all are at all times a student of it, what was that experience like for you? How do you feel that song went? Do you feel like you were present for what you expressed? Do you feel like you could comment on the content or the statement? From my angle, I loved it. I loved what you expressed, and I love your voice all the time. Do you feel like doing that? How did that feel to do that? And do you have a sense of a feeling about how it was?
Yeah, I think I like the idea, or that term. I don't know, everything happens for a reason. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I think things can happen for no reason at all. But in fact, I think most things don't happen for reasons. But what I think is amazing is that the human mind is fantastic at making reason out of madness. So things may not happen for reason, but we create that reason. We're able to make the reason out of the things that happen. And so when you're in a manic state, your brain is working to take a look. It's like positive thinking on steroids. You're able to see madness comes at you, and you're able to rearrange it and organize it to suddenly create meaning from the chaos. And that meaning is saying that you are what's making this great. And so that is generally what I think creates such that beauty that I see. I think this comes down to positive thinking. I believe in the power of positive thinking. It's not that positive people and negative people get different information. Positive people and negative people get the same information. Same stuff comes at them. Negative things, positive things. Bop, 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 bop. But the positive person is going to notice the positive information. The negative person is going to notice the negative information. And they will act upon that information. And because they act upon it, the positive person acts on positive information. So therefore, they create more positivity from that positiveness. The negative person creates negative, acts upon the negativity. And so you create this feedback loop. And ultimately, that's what I think goes into what rides into a mania or what rides into a depression is a mental feedback loop that you create for yourself. So that what happens is that the positive information that comes to your brain creates positive action, which then finds more positive information to create more positive action. And you ride this up and up and up and up until you get your way up to a 8, 9, 10, bada bing, bada boom, you are God, because there's nothing to check that feedback loop. And the same thing goes the opposite way. There's nothing to check the feedback loop going down. And so ultimately, that's what I find the medication does for me, is that it checks the feedback loops that I have going on in my head at all times.
And Alex, you mentioned earlier, I think before the interview, in some ways, that there's a way in which improvisation factors into experiencing and coping with your story and your experiences with mental health. And I'm listening to this notion about people with a positive mindset or people with a negative mindset, or how in many ways both of those mindsets can be exhibited by the same person or by yourself or by myself. When you have an extreme high and you feel like all the positive things in the world are because of you, and if you have a low and you think all the negative things in the world are because of you. Do you find improv as a mode of art or a mode of expression, do you find there's a similar modality in terms of when you're improvising and you're in a negative mindset versus if you're improvising and you're in a positive mindset?
Yeah. I remember it was level 4 at IO that I was in, and I had been going through a lot of stuff. I was at a job that I didn't like, I had a breakup, just negative things were happening to me. So I kind of found myself in a negative feedback loop. And I remember, this was not necessarily a bad thing, but none of my scenes ever took any comedic take. None of them did. I never found the joke in anything. Everything went kind of like every initiation that was given to me, I would find some sort of sad sentiment to it. And so all my scenes are super serious. And I remember beating myself up for it. I'm like, Jesus, all my friends are getting laughs and I'm getting nothing. But it was still good improv from what my teacher was telling me. But it was at that time that, I could tell my mindset, what was going on in my life really impacted the way that I saw an initiation. And I found that the other way too, was that when I was in a really popped up manic stage, last I could say when it was after I graduated from the level 5B, I guess, and we had our run of shows. I was on a medication that turned out to cost $1,500 without insurance when I ended up losing my insurance after getting fired. So I ended up stopped taking that medication I was without meds for about 2 weeks. And I went into a manic state where I was sleeping probably 30 minutes a night. And apparently some people were saying that my improv was on point. Like, they were saying it was some of the best improv they've seen. But it was very high energy. I was finding the jokes everywhere. I was looking for, I was able to kind of have this very popping acting style. Now, do I think that the two were, one was better than the other? I don't think so. And that's why I do like my medications, because without the medications, or when I am in a depressive or a manic episode, the it no longer is as dynamic. What I do like about being able to sit at a 5 and be able to expand to a 6 or a 7 or to a 4 or a 3 is that I can be able to kind of jump between the two, and so I can create that variety, and I'm no longer stuck into one lane. And being able to do that really is, for me, what the core of acting is about, is being able to explore emotions. And so I think that is really why I do love having medications while being an actor, is because it allows me to be more dynamic.
And it sounds like that dynamic, when you're on the medication, you can portray that dynamic, but it is something that you are choosing as opposed to something that is happening outside of your control?
Exactly. That's the other thing, is that I get to decide how the scene goes rather than the scene happens to me.
That's very interesting. Do you feel, just to maybe take it out on something here, because I'm relating to this, of course, and I feel sometimes like the muse of creation can carry us away, and it's complicated, certainly in my experience, because let's say you're working on some music in the middle of the night and you catch a ride of inspiration, almost to the point where it's divinely attuned what's going to happen, and you're just kind of receiving this information and capturing it on audio. Comparing that versus a mindset of you're a craftsperson and you are making choices in a sober state. And it's complicated. I don't think there's necessarily an answer to that. And if you have one, I'm certainly all ears in terms of how to balance that that notion of maintaining that spontaneous joy that you experienced when you were having those hot weeks of improv, and balancing that against a tempered, sober appreciation for being in control of your emotions and controlling your behavior, rather than having it just be at the whim of some sort of universal pulse that kind of happens to you and you just have to serve it. If you were now to take us out on musing about that and potentially arrive not in any sort of official on-the-record way, but kind of through choices and through being moved emotionally by your musical muses here, Alex, to get us to a final song, a final number of maybe offering encouragement about staying in control and managing those extremes, whether it's through medication or whether it's through a mindset, to tap into relating about that focus or that commitment to staying level-headed and staying outside the red zone where you're losing control, and potentially sing a message to another version of yourself or to somebody who might be listening, on behalf of appreciating the value of, I guess, a sober emotional state, or going in any whatever direction you want, because it is improvisational, and it's a song, and it expresses whatever you feel like expressing in the moment. So wherever you're at right now, would you take us out with something that connects us to that notion of putting yourself at a level that you want to live at, like maybe a song called "The Level Where I Want to Live" or something like that?
Well, hey. Well, hey. You gotta work hard for it all. A marble sculptor has to chisel every bit. A marble sculptor doesn't have to put up with it. It happens chip by chip, and oh, it happens so slowly. And sometimes creatively, we have to take our time and trust the process in line. But then, like a flash and a bang and a pan, it says, here I am. Oh, inspiration hits, but you need to be there to receive it. Oh, when inspiration hits, you need to be there to receive it. You need to be there to receive it.
That was lovely, Alex. Thank you so much. And really, I think drives home the point of one of the real struggles to be an artist who has bipolar. I feel really seen by that song, because you have caked, or I'll just speak of myself, I have built into me, caked into me, a desire to be that channel, to be that conduit for inspiration on behalf of others as well. And it really is kind of like being up on that cross. Like, this has to come out. Inspiration is here, and it's for the world's benefit, versus balancing that against a more tempered way of behaving and creating of bit by bit and chiseling by chiseling. And I think probably most artists would say that there is a mixture of the two that create an incredible result for those who do experience an incredible result. So I feel really seen by that mixture that can be, if you have a mental illness, a dangerous mixture of being ready for that inspiration, but then also putting in the elbow grease to foster that inspiration when it does strike. But then also that fear of, like, if you're on your medication, are you going to impede that inspiration in some way? So that's my take on it. Anything that you would like to add from your perspective, weighing in on this at this moment?
I think that just like improv, mental health is so much about being in the moment. And that's probably one thing that draws me to improv, is that it is a very mental health conscious art form. And when you're able to live in the moment, when you're able to have those moments of clarity, and you can have that moment of control, that's when the magic actually happens. The magic doesn't happen out in La La Land. That's delusion. But the real magic happens in the everyday.
That's beautiful, Alex. I really appreciate that, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.